is Rachel, and this is my July wrap-up. So I noticed that about halfway into July, I really hadn't gotten that much reading done. I'd got on this kick of like going through random closets in my house and cleaning things out, as I am really trying to pare things down, but I was spending literally all of my free time doing this. So about halfway through July, some readathons were starting, and I decided to put the cleaning on hold and enjoy my last few weeks of summer with some readathons. So that's exactly what I did, and that's where I got most of these books read. Let's go through the books I did manage to read in July. So first up is one that I did manage to read towards the beginning of July, and that is Catalyst by Lori Halse Anderson. This I picked up mostly because she wrote Speak, and I love that book. This was on my shelf for a really long time, so I decided to give it a read. And this one follows a main character who has a little bit of drama going on in her life. She's kind of feels like she's reaching a boiling point when things get even worse. Her enemy at school and her next door neighbor, her house burns down, so she has to move in with our main character and her family while they rebuild the next door neighbor's house. And there is some conflict and some realizations and some drama and a really, really sad part. So a lot happened in a little book, but I just don't think it lived up to Speak, which this even takes place in the Speak universe. The main character from Speak is actually even mentioned in this book, but it just didn't work for me. I just really didn't enjoy this one as much as I was hoping to, so I gave it a 2.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I picked up Every Last Lie by Mary Kubica. I mostly picked this one up because we met the author, and I really enjoyed her talk about this book. This follows a main character who has just had her second child, and while she's home, not babysitting, but taking care of her, I guess you could call it babysitting. Do you still call it babysitting if it's your own baby? Because you're still sitting with the baby, but whatever. When she's home with her very, very much newborn baby and her toddler, she finds out that her husband has died in an accident, and we kind of go back and forth between the wife's point of view from having learned that her husband's died to digging through all of the information in his life and all the possibilities leading up to the crash. We also, in alternate chapters, hear from the husband with all these kind of odd dealings that he was in leading up to the crash. So there is very much a mystery surrounding his death, even though the police do not believe it to be anything mysterious, just a kind of random car accident because he was going too fast. But overall, I thought it was okay. I think that the pacing was weird sometimes, and I absolutely enjoyed the husband's perspective more than the wife's perspective, which was weird. And I can't decide how else you could do it, but it is, I think, weird that you find out the husband dies, like, within the first couple pages, but it doesn't really feel like he dies until the end. Like, you don't really feel sad, really, until the end when it's kind of more finalized, because even though you know it, you keep hearing him every other chapter, so he's still very much present in the book. So I thought that was kind of strange, that you know he's dead, but you don't really agree with it. But some weird things happen in this book, some things I did not see coming, so while I enjoyed reading it, it wasn't anything super out of this world for me, so I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Next, on my kick to purge things in my house, I read The 100 Thing Challenge by Dave Bruno. This basically is a memoir of a man who realizes that he's not living the life he wants to live, that his things are starting to take over his life, and he's working to get money to buy things to keep in his life, and that he's not really living the life he wants to. So he decides to get down to just owning 100 things and live like that for a year. And it's basically just kind of a memoir following what leads up to this challenge and then his life during the challenge. I was hoping this book would offer more like guidance, I guess, on how to live with less and how to really reevaluate your purchasing habits, but well, I think it kind of does while you reflect on his adventures in this realm of purging. I think it was just a lot more about the author and his journey than about advice for you, if that makes sense. So I did enjoy it, but it wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be, so I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I picked up Nimona to reread. This is by Noelle Stevenson, and this is one of my favorite graphic novels of all time. This follows a supervillain and his new accomplice, and his new sidekick turns out to be a little bit more, I think, than what the villain bargained for. She ends up being a shapeshifter, and there is a lot of interesting twists as they begin to work together. And I just love this. Blackheart, who is the villain, is one of my favorite characters. I just think he is just so precious. I love him. And this time I listened to the audiobook, which is a full cast audiobook presentation, which is amazing. And the last time I read just the audiobook. So in the future, when I reread it, I think I'm going to try to put the two together, and I think it's going to be just a phenomenal experience. So if you have not read Nimona yet, you need to go do it. It's amazing. It is absolutely amazing. Gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Next is Everybody Yoga by Jasmine Stanley. I really, really like this one. I'm getting into yoga just barely. I mean, I'm not like attending classes all the time, and I'm not, you know, turning completely into a yoga fanatic, but I'm just trying to kind of put my toes in a little bit. So this was a perfect book. It was very body positive, and it was also very inspiring for people who aren't really yoga experts, yogis, if you will. There was a lot of information about what led the author into yoga and a lot of her experiences, but I would say a good half of the book was just basic poses for yoga and different accommodations you could make to make your own practice a little bit more doable, manageable, and there was also a few sequences in the back combining these poses that would be perfect for various points in your life, and I really, really liked that part of it. Even though I'm trying to buy less books, I may end up buying this one because I really, really love the information about the poses and all the sequences at the end. So if you're looking to get into yoga, I would highly recommend this book. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Save Me a Seat by Sarah Weeks and Gita Varadarajan. This book follows two I wouldn't call them, well, maybe two kind of underdogs in a middle school setting. I believe they were in 5th or 6th grade, and one student is a bit bigger than most of the kids his age, and he has a learning disability, which causes some issues for him with his peers. He's kind of a lonely kid. The other kid is kind of an outsider because he has just moved from his hometown in India, and he's having a hard time adjusting because in India, he was a popular kid, he was known as a smart kid, he really fit in well, but now that he's here in this new school, he's not fitting in. People assume that he's not as smart as he is because they feel he doesn't speak English clearly enough, even though it's his first language, and he forms kind of an unlikely alliance with the other boy. And it's just a really sweet story. I like the cultural differences from an Indian perspective. I also like the inclusion of a student with a learning disability and how it highlights that he is not less intelligent because of his learning disability. And the same thing with the Indian student, that he's not less intelligent because people think he doesn't speak English clearly enough. I really enjoyed this book. I'm looking forward to recommending it to my students. I think that it's entertaining, while it also gives a really good perspective on how we treat people. So I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Now, the last 4 books were all part of my 24 and 48. The next several books I read for the Booktubeathon at the very end of July. So first up, I read Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I thought this was not what I thought it was going to be. Let's just put it that way. So I think I was a little bit surprised. This was a very serious look at race relations in the United States. And although I really enjoyed it, I think I did not read this at the right time. For first, because of the topic and how deep this book is, I really was struggling with it for the readathon because it's not something you want to sit down and read just in one go, even though it's a very short book. So I picked it for my read a book in one day challenge, and I did struggle with that because it is pretty deep and you want to be able to reflect on it a lot more. So in that aspect, it was not a good choice for a readathon. And also because I really wanted to talk about it when I was done. So nobody was reading it with me. I read it in one day. I just was not a good choice for a booktubeathon, readathon. However, I think this would be an outstanding choice for maybe a book club where you can take your time and read it and discuss it. And again, it's pretty deep, and I think this is a book that you're going to want to pair read with people. So with that in mind, I did enjoy it, but I just think I would have enjoyed it more if I had chosen to read it in a different setting. So I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. But I just got an arc of his next book, which I think is called We Were 8 Years in Power. So I'm excited to read that one. Will not pick it for a readathon this time. Next up, I read Bob's Burgers Charbroiled by Rachel Hastings. This is a graphic novel of the popular show Bob's Burgers, which I love, love, love. So of course I love this graphic novel. This was the one I picked to read outside, and it took me no time. I sped right through it, and it made me hungry for some more Bob's Burgers. So I gave it 4 out of 5. Next up, I read When Dimple Met Rishi by Sandhya Menon, and I loved this book. I just love this book. This follows our main character, Dimple, and she is super excited to go away to this summer camp for kind of tech geeks who are going to work on an app that might get picked up by this kind of famous tech geek. And she is so excited to go. Her parents finally agreed. But what she doesn't know is that the only reason her parents agreed is because they have kind of set up an arranged marriage for her, and the boy they have picked is going to meet her. Now, the funny part is, the meet cute is that Dimple doesn't know what's happening, and Rishi does know. And so they kind of approach each other a little bit awkwardly, but it goes well after that. It's very kind of Pride and Prejudice in the sense that initially there's a lot of friction, and they just don't see a relationship together. But as they begin to work together, you know what happens. And I'm a sucker for this kind. I really like this, and I really, really loved the Indian culture brought into this book, and I also really love the fact that we have a girl pursuing her dreams in a technology field. I absolutely love this book. I'm so excited that I read it, and I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. Next up, and the last one I read for the Booktubeathon, was Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. This book was way better than I was expecting it to be. I have to be honest, I'm not a huge Trevor Noah and The Daily Show fan anymore. I used to love Jon Stewart and The Daily Show, but it just didn't quite seem the same when Trevor Noah took over. But I loved this book. I thought it was really, really an interesting look at somebody who you think you know, and you think you know a little bit about because you see them on TV. Basically, it's a story of him growing up in South Africa during apartheid. He is a mixed man. He had a white father and a black mother during a time when this was literally illegal. And just all of his trials and tribulations growing up, mixed in a place where race was used to decide a lot about you, in basically a third world country in the middle of South Africa. And I mean, it was funny, and it was interesting, and it was startling to think that somebody who is roughly my age could have lived a life like this in this time. You just don't think that these things would happen to people, but obviously it did. And I think it's just really an eye-opening experience of not everybody lives the way that you live. So if you haven't read this one, I would highly recommend it. Even if you don't think you're a fan of Trevor Noah, I think you'll be a fan of this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. So there you have it. Those are the 9 books that I managed to read in July. I am going to be going back to school now, so I'm not sure how that's going to affect my reading. My guess is probably not as much, but I am hoping to utilize audiobooks a little bit more while I'm at work. I am a librarian, and I spend a lot of time just doing very monotonous things like cataloging books, getting them ready for circulation. So there is some time where I would be able to listen to an audiobook, so I'm hoping that that'll up my numbers for August. We shall see. So thanks for watching. Let me know your favorite July book down below, and I will see you soon in another video. Bye for now.